Welcome to Activate Your Introvert, the weekly radio show to uncover and unlock the entrepreneurial skills in your business. In this week's show, introverts are more romantic. Understanding introverts in your team, and an interview with Canadian journalist Sarah Moore. Sarah is a journalist in Nova Scotia. She recently wrote a brilliant article about introversion in journalism and the myth that all journalists must be extrovert. After reading it, I just knew I had to interview her. But just before speaking to Sarah, an idea about understanding introverts in your team. The first thing is, why bother? And this created quite a lot of discussion earlier this week on World Introvert Day. In many teams, the structure and the way the team is run tends to disfavour the introvert. I call it the extrovert bias. As introverts can easily be a third to a half of your team, you can very easily be losing productivity, creativity, and diversity of thinking, and they're all important to your business. So understanding your introverts will allow you to increase the ways they contribute to your team, and you'll get a better business. Introverts are often less understood than more gregarious people, perhaps because they don't say as much. Number one, don't be suspicious. Introverts are more likely to be quiet. They're not shying away from you or uninterested in the team. They're probably being thoughtful as they tend to examine their surroundings. Number two, introverts are not antisocial. Introverts may, of course, choose not to go out to every social event every day. That doesn't make them antisocial. One thought is, how can you create team events that won't cause them to drain so much of their people energy? Maybe the current online working world gives you a chance to do just that. Introverts need their quiet time. Even fully involved introverted team members need recharging quiet time. So don't be insulted when an introvert wants to be left alone. And the final one, introverts and the phone. It's quite possible that your introverts will prefer face-to-face time over the phone. On the phone, there are less non-verbal cues, and it can be harder to keep a conversation going. If you are face-to-face, any silent parts in that conversation are more easily understood and managed. Do let me know what tip you'd like to help you activate the entrepreneurial skills in your business, or what introvert myth you'd like exposed. Drop me an email, give me a call, or add it as a comment to your review on the iTunes store. I would love to hear from you. But now, it's time to chat to Sarah Moore about introverts, journalism, and stereotypes. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
That article that you wrote I thought was really good, really clear. What did you learn about introversion as you were researching and writing it?
Well, I learned that there are more introverted journalists than I was expecting. Statistics for that aren't really well researched, and I couldn't find any really hard data, but just talking to people, they would always say, you can always talk to this person and this person. They're also introverted. I know so many people in journalism are, and that was really not something that I was expecting because there's a stereotype that journalists are these super extroverted people. And I also found that it didn't really matter all that much what kind of personality they had. That didn't dictate whether they were going to be successful in journalism or not. There were ways to work around challenges.
Tell us a bit more about the stereotype.
Definitely. Well, in my experience, it was always journalists are almost confrontational people. You have to go up and talk to strangers all the time. And if you don't have the right personality to do that, and if you get nervous and scared, you probably shouldn't be doing this. I don't think that is the right perception, because there are certainly aspects of journalism where you do have to talk to strangers, or you have to go up to a scrum and make your voice heard. But introverts are just as capable of doing that. And a lot of the introverts that I talk to who are political reporters or really all journalists, they said that while it was challenging to like go up to a scrum and make their voice heard, that was also one of the most rewarding experiences that they had. What they said was really, one, it does get easier with practice, those kinds of difficult situations, but also they're really rewarding. And the connections that you make with people, whether that's through scrums or interviews, that on the surface you would think that introverts would really, really dislike, those are actually the more rewarding parts of journalism for a lot of introverts.
So some of the stereotype journalism things, or stereotype introvert things, like having to go and address and fight your way into a crowd of people, your research showed that introverts not only can do that, but having done it, it's rewarding. Was there particular ways that they found of doing that suited them rather than maybe certain extrovert?
Yeah, one big way of coping was putting on a different persona in a way. When you're forced into those situations, you just assume the role. You are this, not necessarily extroverted, but you are this reporter. You're here to do your job. So just kind of getting out of your own head and to get you through that, but it does become more and more natural over time.
How do you reconcile putting on an act and being yourself? Because in one way, I guess, like many careers, journalism needs you to be yourself as well as be successful.
Well, I think in journalism specifically, there are aspects that are suited for both. So if you're a reporter who's going out to do interviews and then you come back home to write the story, extroverted journalists that I talk to, they don't love just sitting there and writing and editing their work. Like that's a lot more difficult for them than the going out and talking to people. So there's definitely a balance between the different tasks that you have to do. So for introverts, you have to push yourself to go out and do those interviews and talk to strangers, but you also have that time afterwards to create the story, that do that writing or transcribe, and that stuff is all solitary and more suited to the stereotypical introvert.
Journalism then comes across as extroverted because you need to go and dive into crowds of people and extract, I guess, quotes and get attention from people. Do you think that carries across into other professions and careers?
Actually, my brother is also a lawyer, and he read this article and shared it, and people from his law firm were commenting on it, saying that a lot of the stuff can be applied to other industries because you're always dealing with people in whatever job you're doing. So jobs that have more of that, whether it's journalism or law or whatever, where you have that people management aspect, definitely crossovers.
And we all have to do that in different ways, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
How do you define an introvert then, Sarah?
I consider it as someone who gets more energy from being alone, and when they're in big groups of people, their energy drains. But at the same time, a lot of introverts I talk to, and I find this for myself as well, depending on what group of people you're with, that's not always the case.
I certainly see that the energy drain will be there, but far less dramatically if it's perhaps a small group or a group of people that you know intimately well. So we can all lose energy. But as you say, we can to a certain extent learn tricks to succeed around that. I mean, one of the phrases in your article was the bit where it spoke about this journalist that goes up to a scrum and competes for the attention of public figures, or has to ask contentious questions at press conferences, and how it makes his stomach crawl with nerves. How does he go about getting around that?
His favorite part of journalism isn't that sort of thing. It's it's filing freedom of information requests and digging through data and finding stories that way. But what did he? I think he was the one who mostly said that he has to put on an act to do that, and that introverts are also, when they're journalists, they're doing a service. They're holding public figures accountable. So at a press conference, when you're asking that contentious question, you're playing an important role. So I think remembering.
So it's about focusing on what you're going to achieve out of it more than
absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
A little more the long term.
Yeah. The other piece that came across is double checks, read through his research again, make sure he's got his facts straight, so that when he does ask that question, it goes straight in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you know exactly what you're talking about if someone challenges you. Because I think that's always a bit of a fear that an introvert would have, that someone's going to say, are you sure about that? You do know what you're talking about.
That's a great strength of introverts then, to actually double check and be aware of their facts. If I was to ask you for a tip for introverts to communicate with others, what one tip would you share?
The tip that I would say, that there's nothing wrong with taking your time to make sure that you're communicating in a clear and effective way.
I think that's a really important one. As you say, the advantage of the internal processing is what comes back out of your mouth is really good. An external processor quite often will fire words back out as they make sense of them later on. But of course, the words are already out there and maybe unclear by then. If you were to offer a tip for perhaps a non-introvert to communicate with introverts?
Along those same lines, even though extroverts are often, they get more of the attention for speaking up first and speaking loudest, and making sure to just give attention to people who might naturally be a little bit quieter and actually listening to what they have to say.
I think actually that's a really good and important point, and one that many people miss. Again, it's the, if you like, it's the opposite of the internal external processing thing. If I was an extrovert and I ask you a question and you stop and think about your answer and I dive in before you even get an answer coming out of your mouth, you're just being cut off. None of us like being talked over. Sarah, thank you. That's really good. Now, I'm sure that some of the listeners will want to get back in touch with you. What's the best way for them to do that?
My Twitter is at Sarah_Moore_1. So that's the best way. Sarah with an H, and Moore is Moore.
Okay, and I'll put the URL on the sleeve notes as well, so you can just click to get back in touch. Thank you so much for your time, so it's been really great. What's the weather like in Nova Scotia at the moment? Is it any colder than the UK?
I'm not sure what it's like in the UK, but it's a little bit frosty here this morning, but we haven't had any snow for weeks, so it's quite mild.
Yeah, we've had a cold weekend, but I guess it will soon get colder for you guys and it won't get that much worse for us. So
yeah, we should have some pretty good winter storms.
Fab. All right. Thanks for talking, Sarah. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye now.
And now it's time for Introvert Myth of the Week. Those crazy stories that I hear and you hear, but some people actually believe. Introverts are more romantic. I was thinking of saving this one up for Valentines Day, but it cropped up in a team discussion I was running this week. Now obviously the team had some excitement at a Christmas party, I guess. The simple answer is no, introverts are no more romantic. Perhaps this myth comes from the fact that introverts are more likely to spend time in their own head, which could be interpreted as thoughtful and loving. I don't know. Research suggests introverts may tend to be more fantasy prone. I'm thinking romantic ones rather than the kind of fantasy you might be thinking of, but not everybody who has fantasies is more romantic. Like many things, the real answer is to go back to the question. Rather than asking, are introverts more romantic? They're not. Asking, what do you mean by romantic? Next week, I promise, we'll go back to a more traditional introvert myth. Thank you for listening to Activate Your Introvert, and I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. I'd love to see your reviews on the iTunes store. Thank you once again, and catch up with you next week.